you all so much for being here this evening and for the incredibly warm welcome you've shown us since we've been here. Thank you for a fantastic stay so far. I think I speak for all of us visiting from New York in saying that we have the most fantastic impressions of Heist and Seoul and Korean culture and the legal world here. And so thank you very much for being here tonight and giving us this forum. So I'm going to speak about work that I'm currently doing on trademark law. I've done over time a good amount of empirical work on U.S. trademark law, particularly with my first co-author here, Barton Beebe. And we studied fun things like, well, are we running out of trademarks? Have we used them all up at this point? And when we studied those issues, we realized that it was easy to focus on words in trademark law because it was just easier to count and study what was going on there, and much harder in the context of another part of trademark law or another subject matter of trademark law, which is images. And and yet, it's an important part of trademark law because, as you see from just this illustration here, I imagine some of these are familiar to you, some of these may be American, only that some of these are familiar to you in quite a global world, is we live in a world where trademarks are often represented with pictures or stylized words or pictures with words, and images are really important to understand and to process. For the trademark system to operate successfully in doing its goal of promoting competition and diminishing consumer confusion. And in particular, trademark law has to contend with identifying marks that are confusingly similar to other marks, and also making sure that symbols are distinctive and are source signifiers. And the way that has happened is that trademark law has to both look at which marks are already out there to see if it's distinctive, but also assess whether it actually serves to consumers as a source signifier rather than being something like a generic term. And as you'll see from walking through this, at least in the US, and I imagine from what I've learned, that the Korean trademark system may not be that different in many important ways, that trademark law has a very difficult time with images, and so we are trying to work through how technologies like AI might be useful to help improve the trademark system with images, where it might have limitations, but where it can help, and also how humans who are not using this technology can think more productively about trademark law with regard to images. So, the one thing that we see when we look and we start seeing what's going on, we see that there are increasing numbers of applications in the U.S. Trademark Office for images. And we also see that there are an increasing number of registered marks. Okay, so this is an issue that the trademark system has to contend with. And yet trademark law has a very rudimentary understanding of how to deal with images. It first imagines that images are not analyzable. You can't analyze them the way that you can analyze words. Here's what a leading trademark treatise in the US says. There's no point in launching into a long analysis of the judicial pros and cons regarding visual similarity of marks. Regarding visual similarity, all one can say is, I know it when I see it. That's not much of an analysis, okay? And similarly, the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board in the US will say about these two logos here for automotive, that these logo similarity is a subjective opinion, and no amount of discussion on our part can add to the conclusion we have reached. And they say no confusion. But yet, on the other hand, they take these penguins here and say, that's strikingly similar and confusing, but they also have no analysis for that. And so trademark law tends to treat images as not being analyzable. It reaches conclusions as to them, but it doesn't give you analysis the same way it would with words. The second thing that we see is that it tends to take an image's meaning more seriously than the way it appears when it comes to similarity, at least when it's dealing with trademark examination. And so what do I mean by that? I think, the Trademark Office did something that was very admirable a long time ago when it was very difficult to search through images. And it created this really complicated taxonomy of images. So when you file for a mark containing an image, it will be classified as having a design search code. And so there are 29 top-level categories, and underneath that 157 second level, and then 1,400 third-level categories. They're weird categories, trying to encapsulate every single image that might be possible. So at the top level, you have human beings, furniture, supernatural beings, foods. And underneath that, it's a level of trees, cutlery, bells. And then by the time you get down to the third level category, it's weird things like Dutch women, or some of the things you see here. Heads of devils or horned personages, with or without wings, or leprechauns. So these are the categories that you see. And really some strange ones, as you see here, religious figures, men wearing robes, shepherds, monks, and priests. Like, these are the categories it's breaking things down into, because it doesn't have a good way to search through all the images, and if it classifies them that way, it can search through them using these design search codes. And so that's what the Trademark Office has done for a long time, and that ends up prioritizing the meaning of a visual mark over its appearance, because it's classified based on what it means, not how it looks. And so here you see an application for these paw prints. And so that gets characterized into a design search code for non-human footprints. And so when the examiner comes time to search for similar marks and see if it should be refused for confusing similarity, it only looks within that category itself. And that's, effectively what it sees. And it has to look within there to see if there's anything that ends up being too similar. Okay? And so what it does then is it finds something and it refuses it and it cites this. I'll come back to this to show how limited this is, but I think you already see it's focusing on meaning rather than appearance. Here's an even crazier example of this. So here's the Android logo. And one trademark examiner said, how do you understand what this is when you have to put it in one of these categories? Do you understand it as a semicircle with two holes and two lines sticking out of the top? Is it a Martian? And those are only two of the ways you could describe it. Well, Google chose a way to describe it. It says it's a robot head. And based on that, interestingly, the PTO assigns it a design search code, I don't understand this, for other mechanical applicants for industry, including door closers. This doesn't seem like a door closer or something like a door closer to me, but that's what it assigns it. And so there are other design search codes that might have applied too, some of those that we thought might be applicable as well. Mechanical men or robots is a category. Mythological beings, super beings, ghost aliens, semicircles. Okay? And depending on which search code you assign this, which you all can reasonably do, the examiner will find different things, a different set of things. And I'll get back to this later, but the spoiler alert is the examiner didn't search for any of these other things when it's looking for confusing similarity. It only looked at the design search code here for this other mechanical applicants, including door closers. Okay. Now, it focuses on meaning over appearance, but it's not for similarity. But in other contexts, it focuses on appearance over meaning, and particularly with regard to distinctiveness. So that seems odd, but the reason is because trademark law has had such difficulty figuring out what makes an image distinctive. It's come up with ways to understand word marks, right? It decides, is a word mark generic, is it descriptive, is it arbitrary, is it a pointer? That's an easier, it's not always easy, but it's an easier task with regard to words, but it's a really hard task to do with regard to images, because what makes an image generic. And I'll come back to this later, but because it found such a hard time with that, it decided to create a different test. And I don't know if it looks at all similar in this country, but what it did was mostly, it's a very complicated test. You see up there, the Seabrook test. And it's basically asking, is it a unique or unusual image compared to other images in the space. So it's again just comparing it to other marks to see are there similar ones or is it different from them, and if it's different enough, that means it's distinctive. Okay, and in that sense, it's focusing on how it looks to decide whether it's distinctive rather than what it means. Okay, so here you see an example of this. Here are a number of different marks for rug companies. And you see they're all using a rug stylized in some way in it. Now the Abercrombie test might say it's using a rug. That's generic. And you can't have a trademark on that because it's not distinctive. But there's no such issue in the context of images because it doesn't know how to deal with this. Now, the trademark view of images is a little bit rudimentary. The marketing view, the approach that those who design logos take, has more sophistication to it and more thoughts about how to use images. And there are many things they do, but they have particularly a number of rules of thumb. And they want something aesthetically pleasing, they want it to be simple, they want it to be able to be used in multiple contexts, they want it to be able to use it across different countries where people speak different languages. They want to be differentiated from other marks. Very importantly, they want to tell a story. And I think you see these examples here of quite famous marks. The McDonald's logo is a great example. There it's known as the golden arches. So both it shows you an M for McDonald's, but it also tells you a story about being welcoming because you enter through the golden arches, and so it's a welcoming environment, and that's the story it's telling. And we can say the same thing about different stories that Apple is telling with its logo, Nike is telling with its swoosh. And so what we see from the marketing perspective is that it doesn't prioritize appearance over meaning or meaning over appearance. It sees them both as crucial in doing what it has to do. We also see that when a business is choosing a mark, they're sometimes choosing a mark not just because it's it might look like someone else's, they want a free ride on what they've done, but because it's competitively helpful, and they might feel constrained by these rules of thumb to pick things that are similar to one another. Okay, that's the marketing perspective. Now let me turn to the AI part. Okay, and so computer scientists for quite a while have been trying to figure out how do you process images. So here you see all these different representations of Tony the Tiger. You know, I know, they're all Tony the Tiger, but they all look a little bit different. And so we want a computer to be able to tell that they're all the same. This has been a puzzle for computer scientists for a while, and they've worked out ways on how to deal with it. They've also had to work out, if they want to build up a mental image in some ways, or a model of an image, to figure out which features of an image are the most important. So if you look at the top row here, you've got all these three Tony the Tigers. In the bottom row, you've got this dog. Each of those dogs corresponds to the same facial, has the same facial expression as the Tony the Tiger. And that's what we thought was important to us. We'd say, okay, each one of those is the same. But I think in most contexts, many of us would say the Tony the Tigers are the same and the dogs are the same, even though the facial expressions are different. And so computers, if they want to build a model, they need a way to figure this out as well. We see this happens all over trademark law because sometimes you have something changing about a logo, but you still understand it to be the same logo. MGM is a good example. In the prototypical form, it's got the lion in the middle, but when you replace the lion with another character, it's still the MGM logo. And so the way that computer science can deal with this is it can measure the distance between images and look at the things that are different between them and decide how much weight to give those. It can be different in different contexts. And so you see a little bit of a representation of that here about the distance from different colored and different sided images to one another as a way to think through this. Effectively, when we extrapolate, that's part of what AI is building up and is going to build up in the model that we use with all the data that we use from the US Trademark Office and the AI model we use, which is the Salesforce model. And the Salesforce model was trained on logos. It was built to give textual descriptions of logos. And we take the first half of that. We don't care about the textual descriptions as much. We care about the first part where it's building up that model of the images. and it creates a space that here you see a collapse. It's like a gazillion dimensions, but it's collapsed here, and you get a sense of the space that it's representing. And I'll just skip ahead a little bit here. But what it does is it allows us then to take something like that Android logo and see what is similar to it when it's throwing in all these factors about what the image looks like and what the image means effectively. And so what we see here is that the most similar mark to the Android one is this OSPI one with another robot head. Now, is it too similar? I can't tell you that, but this is the most similar one. I'll come back to what this ends up meaning, but you can also use those paw prints example, and we start seeing things again like that we're not in that category of what the examiner searched for, including you see the middle and bottom row is a human footprint rather than an animal footprint. The examiner never cites those. And so you can see how it could be used as a search tool. The problem is that when the examiner, as currently constituted, never would find this because this was in a different design search code, but building out a more robust space offers a way to give examiners and decision makers a sense of space and find ways to locate similar marks despite them being represented in somewhat different ways in the trademark system. And so it leads to what we think are inconsistent assessments of both similarity and distinctiveness, because it's going to depend on how things are categorized. We also think that, so using these AI tools can be useful. There are some limitations, and I'm glad to discuss those, because there are some biases built into this, and so I'm not saying that this particular AI model is the gold standard that we all should use, but it just shows a proof of concept of how this could work. But we also think that this offers a way about thinking about how trademark law should treat images more generally, and this is, I think, there are many lessons to learn from AI in our lives, or computation in our lives. Some of them are stay away from it, some are cautious. But one thing that we think is actually useful here is that we think it would be helpful in the trademark context for legal actors to think more computationally than they currently do, particularly about images. The reason being is they think images are unanalyzable. And I think the marketing perspective and the technical perspective shows that's not true. You can actually analyze them. And you can analyze them not the same way as words, but similarly. And so one thing we advocate for is that, at the very least, the same way trademark law often thinks about words as sight, sound, and meaning of words, and you can break it down. You can break it down in the image context, too, to think about sight similarity and meaning similarity, and think about how much each of them matters to how consumers understand the images. So just to give a stylized example, here are two apples. They both mean the same thing at some level of abstraction, but they look quite different. One is more photorealistic and red, the other is more cartoonish and green. So similar meaning, different sight. You could also imagine something that has similar appearance, right? Here is, on the left, you might say it's like a heart-shaped apple, and on the right is a heart, or more of an apple-shaped heart, maybe. They mean something different when you see them, but they look pretty similar in many ways. And so we think that it's important to break down images and start to analyze their components and give them proper weight in the proper context. We also think that this gives a way to think about images as not just being different from each other in the way that trademark law has thought about distinctiveness, but bringing it back to the way it analyzes words and thinking about, can an image be generic and not projectable? Can an image be descriptive? And it needs to have acquired secondary meaning to be protected. And it raises these difficult questions we have to confront, but we should confront. So for example, here are a collection of image marks in fashion apparel that all use a dove. Now, in some ways, these are all different from each other. None of them are identical. And in some ways, we could say they're synonyms. In the same way, two words can be synonyms for each other. But maybe we might want to say they're generic, or they're too close to each other. And we may not want to have all of them taken off the market. Here's one of my favorite examples of this. This is a very U.S. college sports example, but these are all blog logos for college sports teams. I cannot tell the difference between almost any of them except for the Yale one on the bottom right because it has a Y and it says Yale on the Bulldog shirt. They're all otherwise entirely the same. Now, there may be a more sophisticated consumer than me. I don't doubt it. That may think to be able to name all those. I think maybe there's a Georgetown one in the middle on the top with a G on the hat. I don't know. But all I'm saying is I think we need to confront this question and start asking, are images generic? Are images descriptive? Are images too close to each other that we shouldn't allow all of them to coexist because consumers can't tell the difference between them and there's just too much in that space? And we think that trademark law would be asking that, and we could be building AI models that help us confront that by building out the space of what does it mean for a mark to be too similar to another, but also be too close to the type of goods it's being used for, in the same way that we do that with words. So I will stop there. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to any discussion we get to have. Thank you.